Hello, I'm Rudy Kistler, and this is One Approach to Painting. Today I'm going to be painting a gin and tonic party. As a word of warning, it's best to wait until after the painting is finished before indulging in the drinks, as I found out last week. I'm using Derivan Artist Acrylics, and I'm just going to put this red on because there's no red in the picture, and it's just going to provide a little bit of a contrast to all the colors I put on top. I'm just going to take my brush and smooth out the paint and let the brush strokes alternate so that the light diffuses on the canvas. While that dries, I'm going to mix up my palette. So for today's painting, I'm using the basic primaries of red, yellow, and blue, with the exception of the two yellows that I'm using. And one is the lemon yellow, which is a cool yellow, and the other is a cadmium yellow, which is a warm yellow. And the difference being that when I mix them with the blues, I get these two types of greens. And the one that's mixed with the cadmium yellow is going to give me the color for the limes. And the one that I've mixed with the lemon yellow, the cool, is going to give me this kind of tealy color, which is going to be really great for that gin bottle. I've started off by mixing 5 tones of gray, and I've mixed that just by going pure cerulean blue and vermilion red. And because the vermilion red is an orange-based red, it mixes with the blue to make a gray instead of a purple. Normally if you mix red and blue you get purple, but with these two you get a really nice gray. So I'm going to start by painting tonally with these 5 tones, and then I'll slowly add in these admixtures of the blue and the yellow to make my greens. Now in comparison with the white ground, the limes themselves are a tone darker, if not 2 tones darker. So I'll go ahead and reach into my next darkest tone, and I'm just going to correct the composition now. I can tell that I've got my limes just a little bit too far to the left. Now I'm going to bring up the paper that the objects are sitting on, just to bring up my tones a little bit. So I'll move 1 tone lighter. Just dry brush this out to the top. So you can see that the great advantage of starting with the mid-tone is that instead of painting the shadows in, I can just paint around them. It tends to give them a more realistic feel. Now I can go in and just start to put in some of the tones on the objects with this lighter tone as well. Working wet into wet like this, I can get some really good brush strokes. And now for the bottle. I'm just thinking I might darken the top just a little bit. Dry brush it down. And now I'm just seeing that I might want to bring this up a little bit as well, so I'll go back into the mid-tone. Now it's time to get into color. I've already mixed up 2 tones of each of my greens, which is going to help me out. I'm going to start with the darker tones and work up to the lighter ones. So I'll start with the limes using the cadmium yellow mixed with the cerulean blue, and I'll just put in the shaded sides of the limes first. Now that I've got that in, I'll take the mid-tone green and put on the lit side. And the inside of the lime here seems to be a lighter green, but it's actually got a little bit of a red into it. So I'll just mix a little bit of red into my cadmium yellow green, and that makes it a nice mid-tone, and it's much more lit there, but working dark from dark to light, I'm just going to start with this mid-tone, and then I can always lighten it up. Now onto the bottle. As I said before, the bottle, it looks blue, but it's actually a bit of a teal, and so I've mixed a little bit of the lemon yellow into the cerulean blue, and I'll start with the mid-tone and put that in on the darkest spots. Now instead of mixing into this more of a yellow green, I'm going to just add white to that same blue and just mix a second tone. And now for the lightest one, again adding more white. And there's a bit of a light in the bottom of the bottle, but it's not as light as what I've got, so I'm going to go back and mix a bit of that darker in. It's a really vibrant blue down there, so I might mix a little bit of that lemon yellow in, which instead of white, the yellow just keeps the saturation. There, that's good. We almost have the transparency of the glass now. There's also a little bit of light that shoots through the bottle and is reflected onto the ground. And I might put that in with this lighter blue as well, this lighter tint. It comes out of the corner. Now, the only thing that's glaringly obvious that I need to change is the dark tone of the cap of the bottle. And I've already got my darkest tone mixed up, so I'll just reach into that and use my pure 5th tone to get that darkness. Now's a good time to go back into the background, and I'll switch to my bigger brush for that. Now I'm going to blend that in. It doesn't look like they're going to be dark enough, but you just have to keep in mind that the acrylics darken as they dry, and so it's better to err on the side of lightness than darkness. Now I'll come into the foreground and add a bit more light to the paper. Now there's a little bit of light shooting through the cut line there, and this brush is far too big, so I'll switch to my smaller brush. And this is one of those little points of personality that's good to get in early so that I don't forget. Now once the acrylic is dried, you can see that I'm still kind of in the mid-tones and I need to bring up my lights. I might just put a bit of pure white on just to remind myself how light I can actually go. And since the light source is coming from the right, I'll only put these lights on the right-hand side. This also gives me a chance to put a bit of texture and gesture within the negative spaces. Now I might bring up the light on my limes by taking some of this mid-tone yellow-green, and I'll just add a little bit of white to it. I'm just going to mark my highlights. And again, on the inside of the lime, there's just a little white edge where the peel is coming through. So rather than pure white, I might just dirty it a little bit by putting in some of this gray. Okay, now we have the overall tonality, but it's still quite vague and a bit blurry, so now it's time to bring up some of the details. The label on the right-hand side of the bottle is white, but because of the text and because it's facing the light source, I see it as having a bit of a warm tone to it. So that I can mix this vermilion into my lightest tone, tone 2, and get a sort of a peachy color. I might just add a bit of white to lighten it a bit. And you can see what a difference that makes against this cool tonality. Now there is text on the bottle, and I'll just gesture at it. I don't want to spell it out really. And working wet into wet like this makes it nice and blurry and indistinct. Now I'm noticing that there are a few scattered dark blues within the bottle, and so I'll just take pure cerulean and I'll just add a little bit of vermilion, which will just darken it slightly. So now it's time to bring up the lights again within the bottle. So again, taking this mid-tone blue with a bit of the lemon yellow in it, and I'll add a bit of white and I'll add a bit of lemon yellow to keep that saturation up. Now while I'm at it, I might as well bring up and do the white highlights on the bottle. There's only a few, but it'll help me to see that I've got the tonality sorted. There are a couple of low lights within the black cap. And inside the black cap, it still looks like a hole. So I might take my 4th tone and mix it into the 5th tone just to get an in-between. And I just want to make a subtle adjustment to give it a more of a 3D rounded look. Now it's time to go back to my limes. And first off, I might go into the cut lime and try to get the inside of it. And as I said before, it's got a little bit of a red into that yellow-green. So I'll just take a slight bit of vermilion, a little bit of lemon yellow, a little bit of cerulean blue, and a little bit of white. Put in the most prominent ones first. That's a bit strong. Hopefully it's going to tone down a little bit as it dries, but it starts to modulate it a bit. And then it's much darker in this area, but then here there's just another little flash. And I'll go ahead and bring up the rind as well, just so I can be sure of my tones. The rind is almost nearly as bright as the paper underneath. With things like lines, it's good to do it in a couple of different strokes. It helps to break it up and it increases the scale. If you do it in one line, sometimes it tends to not carry the effect of the realism that we're seeing. Now I might try to darken some of the shadowed sides of the lime by going back into my dark green, but I'm also going to add some mid-tone gray just to desaturate it because it is on the shadowed side and there's not a lot of color happening over there, it's just shadow. Again, this looks quite light, but I'm hoping it's going to dry to the right tone, otherwise I can always just adjust it. On round objects like this, it's good to have lots of different planes and tones to get the sense of the roundness of the object. This lighter tone also reflects the idea that the light is bouncing off the paper and onto the bottom of the lime, and that's what really gives it a rounded look. There's a bit of a rule that says that on a rounded object, the darkest and lightest areas will never be on the edge, and it's something good to remember. You can see that my highlights are in the more towards the middle of the lime rather than on the edge, and the same should go for the darkest shadows. Now I've neglected to put a bit of yellow into this one, and it's in the shadows, so I'll go back into my mid green and then just add a bit of gray, and then I'll add a bit more of the cadmium yellow, and so it'll be almost a dark yellow that I'm putting in there, and that'll help to keep it on the shadowed side. Back to this light that's happening from the light shooting through the bottle, I might now take a bit of white and just add a bit of this mid-tone blue, and it'll be more crisp near the bottle, and then as it moves away it'll be a bit more blurred, so I'll just dry brush and do a bit of a scratch. This also gives me a good reason to put a light against the dark of this protuberance on the lime, and that just tends to highlight that a bit more. Another way to add a bit more light and just to affect a temperature change in the painting is to add a bit of orange into my grays to redo the ground here. I might just take a little bit of vermilion and a little bit of a cadmium yellow, which is going to give me my warmest orange, and I'll mix into my lightest tone of gray rather than just the white. And again, I'll start closest to the lamp, so on this side of the picture. Now you can see that that's got a much warmer feel to it. So I'll just come in and add it in with a bit of a dry brush. And as we get further away from the light, I'll use less and less. So that looks a bit harsh, but I'll let that dry and then we'll go over that once again. But something else I'd like to do is create a bit more space in the background. And we've got a dark mid-tone here and we've got a light mid-tone there. And I'll just break up this area here with a bit of another mid-tone to create the feeling of more space. And if I remember right, this was the third tone. So I might just mix a little bit of my fourth tone into the third and just create another little space back here. To get the progression of space into the distance, it's good to have a repetition of dark, light, and that's all I'm doing here. And on the bottom edge here, I'll just add a bit more of the light to increase that effect. Now I might come back into my warm tone that I just put on the ground. This has had a little bit of a chance to dry. And instead of using the gray, I'll use the white now, because I need to bring it up tonally. And it's good to keep the brush strokes going different directions just so that you don't create any overall direction. Now the darkness of the shadows is really standing out against the lightness of the ground. So I might just come in and lighten the outside of the shadow. As it moves further away from the object, it not only gets tonally lighter, but it also tends to blur a bit. And so I'll reach into my second tone, and I'll just drop in a little bit of the third tone. It looks pretty light, so once I put it in on the tips, I might just clean it out of my brush and then dry brush that, and that'll help to weaken that tone and also blend it into the darker bit. So I've had a chance to step back and look at it, and the overall tonality is pretty alright, and I really like the light coming through it, but I need to reestablish my dark darks. And in a couple of really important places. Just underneath the limes is the first place that I'm going to do it. Once this dries, it might end up being a bit too dark, but I can always bring it back up again. Now I'll go ahead and put the same one underneath the bottle as well to get it to sit. And also on the cap, I'm just noticing that the cap's really not dark enough. I'm also noticing that just below the cap, there's a bit of that gray background coming through, which gives the impression that the bottle is clear and the gin is blue, which is not the case. So I might just want to put a bit of a lighter blue in there as well. The other thing I noticed is that in the drawing, the top right side of the bottle is just coming out a bit too far, like it's sticking its neck out. So I'd like to cut that back in. And that's the great thing about mixing out your tones before you begin, is that I know that just behind there I've used tone 4, and so all I have to do is just mix into tone 4, and I can cut back in. And because acrylics dry slightly darker, it's always hard to color and tone match after everything is dried. So if you know what you've used, you can just reach back into that and make those adjustments. Now I might just dry brush out some of these dark bits under here. They do appear to be a bit too dark, and it looks like they've already dried. So I'll just go ahead and mix into my fourth tone, and I'll just come back in and clean them up a little bit. I'll just dry brush over that. It just helps to diffuse the line, and it knocks it back in tone just a little bit. It's what we call a scumble. Just doing a slightly lighter tone over a slightly darker tone. Now going back into this inside area of the cut line, you can see that it's just a little bit too light. Towards the middle of the lime, it is that light, but around the edges, it's a lot darker. And so I might do a glaze for that, which is a darker color over a light. And again, I'll just take a bit of the cad yellow, a bit of the vermilion to make an orange, and then I'll just add in a little bit of blue. Now this is a really dark color, but I'm going to put it on really quick and wipe it off so that I can just get that glazed effect. So I'll take a new rag and I'll just put it in around the edges. Now I can bring up the greens. So because I've got this saturated highlight here, I might do a desaturated highlight just beneath it. And you can kind of see that on the limes as well. So I'll go into my lightest tone and then come into this yellow-green. I might just add a bit more of tone 3, the mid-tone, just to darken it a little bit. Just near the top of this one, but not at the top. Leave a little bit of a dark edge to stand out from the background. Now these are all looking very green, so I might bring in some more of the yellow, as I did before, and I'll dirty it up by putting a bit of vermilion in it. And I just want a mid-tone, something that's not going to stand out, but it's just going to enrich the color scheme on the limes. I'm just noticing that on the bottom edge that green's a lot darker, so I might just take my green that I used for the limes and I'll just mix in a bit of tone 5, the darkest gray, just to really darken it tonally, rather than mix in blue or red, which will change the color. Now I might go in and just put the last highlights on the inside of the cut lime. It appears to be white with a bit of yellow into it. And I'll just look for the overall shape. Now I might just hit my highlights again. The fruit has a bit of a mottled surface with little dimples in it and things like that. I don't want to handle it in a photorealist approach, but I do want to make an attempt to get that kind of a feel. So I might stick with this lemon yellow and white and just see if I can come into my highlight and break up that shape. That's good, and then I'll just add a bit of pure white just to stand out from that. Now that I'm looking at these white highlights, it makes the green look a lot darker. So I might go in and just put in some lighter tones around the highlight just to enrich it again. So add a bit of white to my desaturated green. And for a finishing touch, I might just put a light highlight up on the top of the bottle. Go back to my lemon yellow and white and just a little bit of vermilion. Use the brush to scratch into it so it just diffuses it a little bit. And I'm quite happy with that. I think I'll leave it. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.